Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief for February 23rd, 2024. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. We're going to cover a few Nova Scotia stories to start off with and then get into some national legal news. And then I'm going to finish off with kind of a fun story in a way, but an unusual thing. Legislation out of British Columbia on pets and how they are to be treated, how they are to be handled during separations and divorces. So groundbreaking legislation as far as the Canadian law is concerned, and so we'll end with that. Some interesting news there. So Nova Scotia cases, there's been some new judges appointed, follow up on Lyle, Howe, and then a follow up on a case that I've covered not recently because it hasn't been in the news recently, but over the last couple of years, this Peter Moorehouse, the former head of the Better Business Bureau, Nova Scotia. Then nationally, Cameron Ortis, whose sentence was just, we just discussed that last couple of weeks. He has appealed. Nathanial Veltman was sentenced. This was the 23-year-old who drove his truck and killed a family in London, Ontario in 2021. Chris Barber, one of the leaders or figureheads of the truckers' convoy, is suing the federal government. We'll talk about that, and a little news out of the foreign interference inquiry as well. So we'll come to that. Starting off with Nova Scotia, and just a note on some judicial, not appointments, but new positions for some judges. All right, there's 4 that I want to mention, taking place just this past week. One is Justice Robin Gogan, judge out of Sydney from the Supreme Court, has been elevated to the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal. So that's a big step up for Justice Gogan. Good reputation as a Supreme Court judge and a lawyer before that. Justice Les Judicial has been named the Associate Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Family Division in Nova Scotia. 2 judges have been named Associate Chief Judges of the Provincial Court, and those are Judge Rhonda Vanderhook and Judge Shane Russell. Judge Vanderhook is based out of the Valley, Judge Russell out of Sydney. Both former Crown prosecutors, and notable that now the 3 judges at the head of the provincial court in Nova Scotia are all former Crown prosecutors. Judge Perry Borden is the chief judge of the provincial court in Nova Scotia. All former prosecutors, not former defense counsel, although just Judge Vanderhook did work as a legal aid lawyer before she was a Crown prosecutor. So there is that. The other thing of note, I guess, and that would include Judge Borden in this, that a lot of the judges that are now in positions of authority and positions of leadership within the judiciary in Nova Scotia are fairly new judges. Judge Borden was just named like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago maybe. Judge Russell, the same thing. Judge Russell I know quite well. Of course, he was one of the 2 inquiry counsel on the Desmond inquiry. Judge Vanderhook, just named a judge in the last couple of years. Same with Justice Judicial. So I guess a new era of leadership within the Nova Scotia judiciary. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how everybody gets along. Good reputations all around, so I'm sure everybody will do just fine. All right, following up on a story that was in the news last week and I talked about, which was the Lyle Howe Court of Appeal victory. And Lyle Howe must have been getting too many kudos from people, or congratulations, because the Bar Society has felt the need to issue a quote, a clarification. They said that some of the media coverage around Lyle Howe's appeal victory, quote, requires clarification, close quote. Begs the question, they don't say this in the release, short release, were they getting phone calls from people that were confused by this, or is this of their own volition? Who knows? Okay, so the Court of Appeal decision, Lyle Howe was disbarred over allegations. Then during that hearing, there was a further complaint made, and he was still disbarred, but there was a further complaint made by the Bar Society, initiated by their legal counsel, and so Lyle Howe's taken action for malicious prosecution over the second set of allegations, but the Bar Society wanted to make sure that it was clear to everybody that Lyle Howe is still disbarred, that the Court of Appeal decision did not affect the original disbarment decision. And so I don't know if that was a necessary clarification, but in their mind it required it. So there you go. Unusual thing to do. They can't get enough of Lyle Howe at the Bar Society. All right, so third thing Nova Scotia related is this, finally, after many delays, I think it was in court 4 or 5 times for sentencing, but delayed each time, is the sentencing decision and hearing of Peter Moorehouse. Peter Moorehouse, former head of the Better Business Bureau, Nova Scotia, fairly prominent in the business community, certainly, individual, pled guilty to child pornography charges, which involved not active, there was no direct contact with any child. It was text messages between Mr. Moorehouse and another individual, for which he apologized. They were so bad they couldn't publish them in the court reports. So he was sentenced to 2 years, and this was done by a joint recommendation. Ian Hutchison was his defense lawyer. He had originally announced or made signs that he was going to challenge the mandatory minimum sentences. There was 2 child pornography charges, a 1-year minimum sentence on each. Now I don't see in the it's not covered in the newspaper article as to whether there was an argument to be made as to whether those 1-year minimum sentences could have been served concurrently rather than consecutively, but Mr. Moorehouse has agreed through his lawyer to a joint recommendation of 2 years in jail. So he'll serve that in a federal facility. If you're 2 years or above, you go to federal custody. Some people, if you're close to the 2-year line, some accused will say they would rather go to a federal facility. There's more services available, educational, counseling, and such services available, and it's apparently a more stable environment rather than the frequent in and outs, changing who's around you situation of the provincial facilities. All right, and we've heard many things about the provincial facilities lately in Nova Scotia with the overcrowding, the understaffing, and such. So, lack of services. In any event, Peter Moorehouse sentenced to 2 years. All right, so those are the Nova Scotia cases that I wanted to cover. National stories. I'm going to start with Cameron Ortis. This was the national security RCMP intelligence officer who was convicted of sharing secrets with a target of our RCMP and Canadian intelligence investigations. During the trial, which was an unusual feature of the trial, there was many things that couldn't be covered, couldn't be released to the public, wouldn't even allow people in the courtroom to hear the testimony. And then Cameron Ortis himself, part of his defense was, no, I wasn't sharing these secrets. I was trying to effectively entrap these people into using an email service that he had designed or was familiar with to get them to use an email service that could be traced and tracked and all those things. And what always struck me as very unusual about the claim was that Ortis, a senior intelligence officer, was to be paid $20,000 for this information, which seemed like it would have been worth millions of dollars if in fact it had been done for nefarious purposes. In any event, the appeal has been filed, and Cameron Ortis is claiming that he could not effectively defend himself because of the restrictions placed on him during the trial to not be able to discuss sensitive national security matters. So in other words, he couldn't name the people he was trying to entrap. He couldn't describe the operation in detail, and that severely limited his defense and led to his conviction, is his claim on the appeal. So we'll keep an eye out on that. That's appeals can take some time to develop and be heard. Certainly one would expect it to be heard within the year, perhaps quicker, but we'll see. Hasn't no word in the article as to whether the appeal. Well, there hasn't been even a defense yet to a response to the appeal, so we'll wait to see on the timing of that as well. All right, another big national story is this sentencing of Nathanial Veltman. Nathanial Veltman was convicted of murder, first-degree murder, in the killing of four members of a family of all Muslim individuals. There was four killed and a serious injury to a fifth, a 9-year-old child. Veltman was 23 years old at the time. This was in June of 2021, and drove his truck into the family deliberately. Now the question was whether this was to be considered an act of terrorism, and the judge this week completed the sentencing hearing and said yes, it was an act of terrorism. It was done deliberately because of the ethnic origin of the family involved, Veltman's own ideological ideological views of the whole thing. And so what does this mean? In a sense, it doesn't mean anything at the moment. So Veltman was sentenced to 25 years life in prison, not eligible for parole until 25 years' time, which is the maximum. So what happens? In 25 years' time, when he's eligible for parole, the fact that he was convicted of acts of terrorism will be considered at the time of parole, making his ability, severely reducing his ability to get parole at that time in 25 years' time, no matter what. Guy's 23, 26 years, 25 years old now, so he would be in jail at least until he's 50 and probably well beyond that. All right, next story. Chris Barber, one of two so-called, depending on the circumstances and what their interests are, leaders of the Freedom Convoy, the trucker convoy out of Ottawa. I say that because in his criminal trial, he and Tamara Litch are both charged criminally with mischief, among other charges, resisting arrest, and so in that part of and in inciting others to do unlawful acts. Part of the case in the criminal context is to identify him as a leader of the of the trucker convoy, someone who was able to direct others to commit mischief, to disrupt the police activity, and so on. Well, it's funny, every time some other story comes up about him, like this one, he's described as a leader of the trucker convoy, Freedom Convoy, however it's framed. Anyway, in this case, this follows the federal court decision on the Emergencies Act invocation, which said basically that the government violated the charter rights of those people, and one of the primary focus points of the decision on the Emergencies Act at the federal court was the seizing of bank accounts from not only individuals involved but people around them. Well, Chris Barber, his wife, and his trucking company all had their assets seized, their bank accounts seized and frozen. So he's suing the federal government, saying that his charter rights were breached. Well, the court has already determined that from the frozen accounts, that he was unable to conduct basic financial transactions, they could not live normal lives, that they were excluded from modern society, and that it damaged their personal and business relationships. That's him, his wife, and his trucking company. So we'll see what kind of damages they're able to show from this. Difficult part of this from Barber's perspective is he's going to have to basically establish that not only did he lose money after his bank accounts were frozen, but that you could tie the, say if he lost clients, lost customers, that was related to the bank accounts being frozen and not able to transact business, versus, oh my God, the guy we're doing business with is leading this trucker convoy and we don't want anything to do with him anymore. If it's part one, the first part of this, that can be tied to this lawsuit and laid at the feet of the federal government. If it's the second, well, obviously that's Chris Barber's fault himself, and people are free to do business with whomever they wish. So we'll see how that develops. As well, next step will be for the federal government to file a defense. They have not done so yet, and to see if that claim settles or what. I wouldn't be surprised if Chris Barber finds himself in another courtroom dealing with basically the same material as he is in the criminal case. Same subject matter. All right, so from one, well, that wasn't the inquiry, but it was the subject of an inquiry, to another, the foreign interference inquiry. I talked about this a little bit last week, and Commissioner Marie-Josée Howe has some more troubles now. Last week I was talking about how she was going to handle secret classified national intelligence information. Now we're starting to have some parties drop out of the process out of just, well, similar concerns. These members of diaspora communities are concerned about the level of access that certain participants in the inquiry have and how that may be used against them. So these are the people, the groups that are concerned. These are participants in the inquiry: the Canadian Friends of Hong Kong and the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, both based out of Canada, but connected to Chinese groups. The concerns they have are the strong ties, allegedly strong ties to Chinese consulates and their proxies that 3 of the other participants have. These are Member of Parliament Han Dong, who was a Liberal Member of Parliament, removed from Liberal caucus, now sitting as an independent, alleged to have ties to the Chinese government, alleged to have told the Chinese government to hold off on negotiating with the 2 Michaels, Kovrig and Spaver, who were kidnapped by the Chinese government. Has full participatory rights. In other words, at the inquiry is able to see all of the documents that are part of the inquiry. So wouldn't be able to see unredacted security documents, but would be able to see every document, even if it's not entered as an exhibit in the proceedings. Same goes for former Ontario Member of Provincial Parliament Michael Chan, alleged to have connections to the Chinese consulates and their proxies. The third is a Senator Yuan Pao Wu, who is not a full participant in the inquiry, an intervener only, so would only have access to those documents, just like any other, well, member of the public even, have access to the documents that are made an exhibit within the inquiry. So the greater concern, I think, is the Member of Parliament Han Dong and former Member of Provincial Parliament Chan. But in any event, these 2 groups have dropped out, undermining, in part at least, the inquiry itself. And I know that Justice Hogue claims at least to be trying to make efforts to ease their fears, talk about security measures they have in place over information. I'm not sure that's going to do it. But so the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Group dropped out about a month ago, the Canadian Friends of Hong Kong just last week. And it'll be hard to know at this point what it would take to get them back, but that certainly is a problem for the inquiry itself and something they'll need to address. Really, the charges that the MP and the MPP were actually connected in some way to the Chinese government have never really been thoroughly debunked or examined, so they may have legitimate concerns there. Okay, so last thing, all right, those are the national news stories. This is a sort of a under-the-radar national news story. I saw it in the Canadian Bar Association publication, and it's which covers sort of new and interesting pieces of legislation, case law, sort of nuanced stuff across the country. And the article was entitled "In the Animal's Best Interest." British Columbia, under the leadership of my former classmate and friend David Eby, is bringing in legislation on, has enacted legislation. It's enacted as of January 15th of this year, legislating that an animal's best interests need to be considered in a separation or divorce. So currently it's whoever, and in other provinces like Nova Scotia or other places, who acquired the pet, who paid for the pet. That's about it. It's treated like, a piece of furniture, a vehicle, any other piece of property. Well, now, and of course, in divorce cases, people will fight over everything, but a pet is certainly something that's very close to everybody's heart, many people's heart. Now, so under this legislation, you have to consider multiple factors, including the ability and willingness of each individual to care for the animal, the relationship of a child with the animal. So if a child's going to stay with one parent and they have a close relationship, well, that would obviously affect, if not determine, where the animal goes. And then any history or threat of violence or cruelty to the animal is to be taken into account. And the article describes, so now an animal, a pet, is more akin to children than to property. And so all of those considerations will be taken into account. It doesn't matter who pays for it or paid for the animal or who did anything to acquire the animal. It's what's in the animal's best interest and in the child's best interest too, if the child is tightly connected. So this is new legislation for Canada, but it's not new legislation overall. Some states have this: Alaska, Maine, New York, Delaware, Illinois, New Hampshire, and California all have legislation of this nature. Spain, Portugal, and France all have this too, treating pets as sentient beings. Actually, Quebec in their civil code has that too, as treating them as sentient beings, but doesn't really go on in detail like the BC legislation does to describe how that is to be enacted in practice when a separation takes place. But one would assume that that's what it means, is to take into account all these special factors. So there you go. Soon we'll see. It's unusual, but every once in a while you'll see cases where children in separation cases or in child protection cases are given a lawyer. They're not, legally competent but they're given a lawyer to speak for them, to advocate for them. I wonder if we're on the cusp of seeing, cats and dogs being appointed lawyers to, advocate for their interests in divorce cases. It would be fascinating to see that happen. It would be fascinating to be the lawyer that makes it happen, or that has to fulfill that role, I should say. So okay, that's it's funny, the things that hold up a settlement in a divorce case, tens of thousands of dollars can go back and forth, and people just sort of, all right, whatever. But obviously, child custody and those questions are very contentious. I can expect now that pets are going to become probably more contentious under this new legislation, but it is good. It's good legislation. I support its enactment. I wouldn't be surprised to see other provinces follow suit now that British Columbia has broken the ice on this. So we'll watch for that from other provinces as they see it unfold in BC. Often a leader in legal innovations in Canada, certainly. So keeping up its reputation that way. Okay, that's it for this week. Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week, and we'll see you Sunday night as well. We're going to be back. Jordan is back from Toronto, I think, for the Sunday night show with Jordan, Paul Palango, and myself. So we'll see you at 9:15 Sunday night on YouTube Live. Got some dirty weather coming in Nova Scotia again, so everybody look after yourselves, clear your drains and all those kinds of things, and we'll see you next time.